Here's a sneak peek into the latest release from Builderius, which sees significant improvements to the collection element. If you're not familiar with the collection element, it is the element we use when we want to create query loops. So if you want to loop through your posts, your pages, your taxonomy terms, static JSON data, or an external API, we use the collection element. So now they've made some massive improvements, and we'll take a look at some of these improvements. Let's begin by taking a quick look at the Builderius roadmap. I'll leave a link to it in the description. So first, you can see that we now have support for any HTML elements within the collection element. Previously, we were restricted to having only 3 kinds of tags. You had the UL, OL, or a custom tag. But now we can use any tag of your choice. Then they've removed the source JSON from the HTML output. It's now optional. Previously, it was compulsory that we had the JSON being outputted within the collection elements, but now it's optional. We also now have a visual condition builder within the loop. Previously, we had to use a workaround with a template element whenever we want to create any kind of conditions within a loop. But now, within the loop, you can just add the loop visually using the same UI like the conditions outside of a loop. Then we've added simplified template element UI. They've cleaned up the template elements, no more information that is not necessary. And we now have a dedicated sub-collection element. The sub-collection element is used when we want to have an array within an array, so a nested array. And we also have a dedicated recursive template element. Previously, we were using workarounds with the standard template element whenever we wanted to do a nested array or recursive array. A recursive array, it just means an array within an array within an array when we don't know the depth of the nesting, and they're just basically the same structure that is being repeated. A perfect example is your navigation menu. Then you have your menu, then you have the drop-down menu. Within that drop-down, you might have a second level or a third level. I wouldn't advise you to have multiple levels like that, but that's an option. So this recursive template, you just put one template and it will use that template to recursively recreate the nested loops. Okay, so now that we've seen what have been added, let's see it visually. So starting with the previous version of Builderius, which still has the old collection element, let me go ahead and drop in a section, and I'll drop in the collection element. And the first thing you notice is that if you go to the element settings, we only have 3 HTML tags for the wrapper. You can either choose custom, UL, or OL, which is very limiting. Although for the most part, these are the tags that you typically use, but for some use cases, that's not enough. For example, let's say you want to have a dynamic select field within your form. You need the select and then a list of options. You can't do that with the previous version. But now with the new version, if I go to the new version, you'll also notice that the demo has been improved. You now have the Builderius logo and a nicer menu and things like that. So with the new version, if I go ahead and add a section and the collection element, this time you see that similar to other elements within Builderius, we have the HTML tag at the top, and you can choose any tag of your choice. They give you an option of the basic tags that we typically use, like the select, we have the table, we have a div, UL, the OL, and so on. And if for whatever reason you have a tag that is not listed there, you can create it. For example, the details tag. So I can say details, and it will generate it. Any kind of tag you want. But let's keep it simple and use the UL. I'll do the same thing for the old version so we can compare and contrast. So the collection element, I'll put the UL. Now, let's go ahead and create an input, a data source. Ideally, you would use dynamic tag and then choose your query loop, whatever tag you want to use. But let's just keep it simple and use some static data. So the static data I'll be using is going to be an array of key value pairs of just usernames. So start with the square bracket for your array, and then each object that has a key value pair, you have to wrap them in curly brackets. So I'll put curly brackets, and the first one is the key as name, colon, the value as David. Then the next one, put the curly bracket again, the key as name, colon, the value as Joshua. And finally, maybe the third one will be key as name. I should wrap that in curly brackets. And the value as Jonathan. Okay, so we have a list of 3 items. Then let me go ahead and add in the template. What is going to be outputted? It's going to be outputting a list of LIs. So I'll click on the element inserter and search for list item. Okay, and you can see right now it's already returning 3 values, similar to what you put as the input. Let's now replace this list item with the actual name. So dynamic tag, and you can see name, and it's outputting correctly. I'll do the same thing on the new version that will compare the HTML on the front end. So I'll go to the new version. It has the HTML tag of UL. Then I'll put the data source like the previous version. Then within the template, I'll add the list item and replace the static data with the dynamic name. And we'll go ahead and save it. And we'll preview both of them on the front end. So starting with the old version, if you right click and inspect, you notice that while the output of the template is clean, so you can see li without any class name because I didn't add any class name, and it also has the text, but on the wrapper, you have this ID and the data B context, which outputs the JSON data. It outputs it the same way you input it. Now imagine you have a large amount of JSON data. It will output everything in the HTML. For example, on the blog page, if I go ahead and inspect, because there are a lot of items, you can see the JSON data. It fills up an entire paragraph. So that's a lot. So now you can go ahead and remove this JSON data, which you can see on the front end in the new version. So if I right click and inspect, with the new version, it outputs it the same way we input it. UL outputs UL, LI, LI. No data attributes, no ID, nothing. If we didn't put it, it's not going to output it. So now you might be wondering, why did they put that JSON data in the first place? It was actually there for a reason. It was used for filtering. So if you want to do some kind of dynamic filtering, you can use that JSON data to filter. But if you're not going to do any kind of filtering, then it's not important. So if you want to add that JSON data back, in case you're trying to do some filtering, you can go back in the new version to the collection element. At the bottom, you see interactive rendering. If you activate that and save, you go to the front end and refresh, you see that now the JSON data is outputted. You can now test out the HTML tag as well. Let's go ahead and change the HTML tag from UL to a select field. The LI, I can change that to an option field. You can see we can now have our dynamic options, and it just works. Everything works. You go to the front end, you see that it works. We have our dynamic select field, which can now be used in a form or in any kind of thing that we want to use it for. Okay. The next thing we'll check out is the improved visual dynamic conditions for our templates. So previously, let's say we want to output the list item only if the name is not equal to David. If you had gone to the template element and tried to do the dynamic condition, add a new condition and choose dynamic data, we choose the name as being not equal to David. You see that nothing really happens. So if I save it and preview on the front end, nothing happens. Everything is still outputted. But in the new version, if I go and choose my dynamic condition on my template, add new condition, and I choose dynamic data, and now choose the name. If the name is not equal to David, then display. You can see it removes David from the list but shows the rest. If I go ahead and save and preview on the front end, it works. So that's the second thing. The next thing we check out is the new SubCollection element as well as the Recursive Template Element. So here we have a demo JSON data which contains an array of events. Within that array of events, we have a sub-array of tags. So now how do we output the list of tags within the list of events? It is quite simple. We start with our collection element. So let me go ahead and delete the old one. Add a collection element. Within the collection, I'll choose my dynamic data, which is my events. Then let me output the templates for the events. So within the template, let me start with a div. Let's just add maybe a div. So within this div, let's go ahead and output some dynamic data. So let's start with the heading. And let's see what tags we can choose. So the tags we have are capacity, description, and things like that. So in this case, we're just going to be looking for, I believe it's called title. So it outputs the title, which you can see when we go to the dynamic data. For each of the events, we have the title as, the first one is Web Accessibility Summit 2025. We have WordPress Accessibility Day 2025 and so on. So those things are there. Then the next thing we want to output is now a sub-array of tags. Previously, we had to add a template element and do some other kind of workaround on the template element. But now we have a new element called the SubCollection element. So we just add that into our already existing template. So that SubCollection element. Now we can choose the data source and it will tell us the sub-arrays that we have. So the sub-array we're looking for is the tags. So now I'll put in tags. Within the template of the sub-array, I can now go ahead and output maybe a simple text, and that will just be, let's see, array item. Let's see why it says array item. I go back to my dynamic data. That's because the tags are just a list of strings. There is no key value pair, so there's no key to be used in the dynamic tag. So we just use a dot notation for that. That's why you see the dot notation, and it returns the list of tags. And that's it. We get our list of tags within the collection element. And now, because we have this simplified collection element and the simplified template element, we can add conditions to the template element without being afraid that something will not work. Because before, we are using so many workarounds on our template element to get it to become recursive, to get it to become the sub-array and so on. But now everything is now dedicated. So now we have a dedicated collection element, a dedicated sub-collection element, dedicated template element, and a dedicated recursive template element. The recursive template element is perfect for things like your menu, when you have the menu, sub-menu, and sub-sub-menu item, and so on. We'll see an example now. So within this same data structure, let's take a look at an example. If you look within the template, we have one called categories. So it's called categories, and within our categories, we have subcategories. Within our subcategories, you might have a second level of subcategories and so on. So you can have like multiple levels of subcategories. You cannot really determine how many subcategories are there. It might be 2, it might be 3, it might be 4. So you can't just start guessing and adding the sub-collection elements. So that's where we now use the recursive template element. What that does is it sees that, okay, the parents template has the same data, because you can see the subcategories all have the same data: ID, name, slug, and so on. Same thing with the sub-category: ID, name, slug. So you don't have to keep remembering all of these. You just do it once and then it will iterate as many times as possible. So let's try it out. So I'll add a collection element again. So let's delete the old one, add a new collection element. And this time I'm going to do for the categories. Okay. And then within that collection element, all I want to just return is the category name, then the subcategory name, and so on. So the category, I'll put a span tag, and I just want to return the name. Okay, so it's returning the name, technology, business. Or let me use the ULLI tag so that it's easy for us to see. So I'll say UL, so we can easily see the hierarchy. And I'll wrap it in an LI for the template. Okay, so now you can see technology, business are different items. So now within this LI, I want to now have a sub UL. So I'll now create the subcategories. So that is the sub collection. But instead of using a template element, because we don't know how many levels there are, I'll delete the template element and I'll add the new tag called Recursive Template. So now all you have to do is on the sub collection, I'll choose my data source as the subcategories, and the template itself is just going to be repeating the template of the parent. So I'll just go to the parent template. I'll give the template a name, for example, cat. Then on the sub collection recursive template, I'll just select that cat that I will choose. And now you can see it's returning the values. So let me make sure that the subcategory is a UL as well. And you can see, so as many levels as there are, it returns the value. Let's look at this on the front end. If I inspect, so as many levels as there are, it just keeps adding the UL and then the list of LIs. Then within that LI, if there's any sub UL, it will return it as the sub UL with a list of LIs and so on. So that's how we can get your recursive template, which is perfect for your sub menu items, which is what they use to create our navigation menu. So yeah, those are just a few features that we added. I'll do a live stream where we can go through everything together on Thursday, I believe. I'll let you know if it goes on. If you're watching the replay, then you would see the link to the replay of the live stream. And yeah, just let me know what you think about the new collection element, what other new features you want to see within Builderius. Until next time, happy web designing. Bye.